Chapter 19. The heat in Ragnac's dining hall was intense. The large number of people present, and the huge open fire that stretched almost the full width of one end of the room, combined to keep the temperature uncomfortably warm, in spite of the deep snow that lay on the ground outside. It was an enormous room, long and low-ceilinged, with 2 tables stretching the length of it, and a third, Ragnac's head table, placed across the others at the end opposite the fire. The walls were bare pine logs, roughly trimmed and caulked where their uneven shape left a gap, with a mixture of mud and clay that set hard as rock. More pine logs slanted up at angles to support the roof, a tightly woven layer of rushes and thatch that was almost a meter thick in places. There was no interior lining. Lighter slats of rough timber were fastened across the roof beams to support the thatch. The noise, with nearly 150 drunken Scandians eating, laughing, and shouting at one another, was deafening. Eric looked around him and smiled. It was good to be home again. He accepted another tankard of ale from Borsa, Ragnac's Hilfman. While Ragnac was the Oberjarl, or senior jarl, of all Scandians, the Hilfman was an administrator who took care of the day-to-day running of the nation. He made sure that crops were planted, taxes paid, raids set out on time, and that Ragnac's share of all raiding booty, a quarter of everything won, was paid promptly and reckoned fairly by the wolf-ship commanders. "It's a bad business all around, Eric," he said. They were discussing the ill-fated expedition to Oraluin. "We should never get involved with a long-running war. It's not our game at all. We're cut out for quick raids. Get in, grab the booty, and get out again with the tide. That's our way. Always has been." Eric nodded. He'd thought the same thing when Ragnac had assigned him to the expedition, but the Oberjarl hadn't been in any mood to listen to his advice. "Still, Morgoth paid us up front," the Hilfman continued. Eric's eyebrows raised at that. "He did." It was the first he'd heard of it. He'd assumed that he and his men were fighting simply for whatever booty they could find, and the expedition had been a definite failure in that regard. But his companion nodded emphatically. "Oh, yes, indeed. Ragnac's no fool when it comes to money. He charged Morgoth for your services, and those of all your men. You'll be paid your share." At least, thought Eric, he and his men would have something to show for the past few months. But Borsa was still shaking his head over the Oraluin campaign. "You know our biggest problem," he said, and before Eric could respond, he continued, "We don't have our own generals or tacticians. Scandians fight as individuals, and in that sense we're the best in the world. But we hire out as mercenaries. We don't have our own planners to lead us, so we're forced to rely on fools like Morgoth." Eric nodded agreement. "When we were in Oraluin, I said that his plans were too involved, too clever by half." Borsa jabbed a thick finger at him. Eric was surprised by the man's vehemence. "And you're right. We could use a few people like those Oraluin Rangers," he added. "Are you serious?" Eric said. "Why do we need them?" "Not them, literally. I mean people like them. People who are trained in planning and tactics, and the ability to see the big picture and use our troops to the best effect." Eric had to agree the other man had a point, but the mention of Rangers had led his mind to the matter of Will and Evanlin. Now he saw a way to solve the problem of dealing with them. "Could you use a couple of new slaves in the Great Hall?" he asked casually. Borsa nodded immediately. "We can always use extras," he said. "Got someone in mind, have you?" "A boy and a girl," Eric told him. He thought it best not to mention that Will was an apprentice ranger. "Both strong, healthy and intelligent. We captured them on the Celtic border. I was going to sell them so I could pay my crew for something of the whole mess. But now, if you say we'll be paid anyway, I'd be happy to give them to you." Borsa nodded gratefully. "I can certainly use them," he replied. "Send them over tomorrow." "Done," said Eric cheerfully. He felt a nagging weight had been removed from his mind. "Now, where's that ale jug got to?" While Eric was deciding their fate, Will and Evanlin had been kept locked in a hut by the quayside, close to the point where Wolfwind was moored. The following morning they were roused by a Scandian from Borsa's staff, who led them to the great hall. There the Hilfman looked them over, studying them critically. The girl was attractive, he thought, but she didn't look as if she'd done a lot of heavy work in her life. The boy, on the other hand, was well muscled and fit, if a little on the small side. "The girl can go to the dining hall and kitchen," he told his assistant. "Put the boy in the yard."